Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. You've heard of it, or if you haven't, you've at least heard quotes from it, because C.S. Lewis is literally quoted everywhere. Originally premiering as a series of radio broadcasts aired by the BBC during World War II, which were then consolidated into a book in 1952, Lewis wrote Mere Christianity as a beginner's guide to Christian theology and apologetics. It's concise, it's got a fancy cover, and it appears on nearly every list I found when I googled most important Christian books of all time, which has to mean something. People from all walks of life have been reading this book for decades, and today I'm here to give you 5 reasons why you should join them. The first reason you should read Mere Christianity is because it's written for both Christians and non-Christians. I think there's a very understandable tendency when a book has the word Christianity in its title to believe that the book is written only for Christians, that the barrier of entry for the book is having at least one of these shirts in your closet. And for a lot of Christian books, I would argue that that is the case. There isn't necessarily a huge point in reading them unless you come from a faith background or have biblical convictions. But Mere Christianity isn't like other Christian books. As it's explained in the foreword of the book, Lewis gave the radio broadcast that eventually became Mere Christianity because he believed that people had never been told in basic terms what the religion is about. That's to say that the book was written specifically for people who don't come from a faith background, or otherwise for people who come from one that isn't grounded in what the Bible actually says. So, in a sense, it's Christianity for Dummies. The difference between it and the actual Christianity for Dummies then is Lewis's approachability and conversational tone, which I'll get to later. A factoid about Lewis is that before he became a Christian, he was a self-proclaimed, very stubborn atheist, and the book reflects that. So for those of you out there who are skeptics of Christianity, knowing Lewis's own faith background should give his arguments that much more credibility and hopefully make what he has to say that much more intriguing. The book isn't just for non-Christians though. Even for Christians like myself, Lewis has something to say. Maybe you grew up identifying as a Christian, but you still aren't entirely sure what that means. Maybe you are a practicing Christian and you just want to see the faith illustrated in a fresh way. Maybe, like Lewis addresses, you are a Christian, but the cornerstone around which you built your entire faith wasn't properly aligned at first, so everything that stemmed from it has been off, and now you're in need of a reset. That's the category I was in when I first read the book a few years ago. Even though I grew up going to church, I always had this works-oriented, let me earn my way to heaven approach to Christianity, which I think is both really common and really incorrect. So Lewis uproots that paradigm and replaces it with a grace-saturated one that the Bible actually talks about. So wherever you fall in the Christianity spectrum, from being adamantly opposed to it, to knowing nothing about it, to centering your whole life around it, know that Mere Christianity has something to say to you and something for you to take away. Reason number 2 for why you should read Mere Christianity is because it's theology written in layman's terms. Again, going back to the foreword of the book, Lewis was originally asked to give the broadcast that eventually became Mere Christianity because he was not a specialist, but an amateur and a beginner, not an old hand. Like I said, he was a former atheist, so it's not like his passion for and knowledge of Christianity was a lifetime in the making, and although he was a professional scholar, his specialty wasn't originally in theology or Christian apologetics. This made him much less intimidating of a man to listen to than other biblical scholars of the time, and if you've ever read any other theological book or listened to any other theological piece, you'll understand why Lewis's simplicity and relatability is so valuable. A few years ago, I read Knowing God by J.I. Packer, another book on Christian theology. Even though in the grand scheme of Christian academia, it's still considered to take a pretty elementary approach to Christian theology, I personally struggled to get through it. When explaining the layers of God in Christianity, scholars like Packer tend to use a lot of technical theological terms like justification and sanctification and adoption, which, hear me say, are important terms to know and understand eventually, but they can also just sound like technical jargon with no real applicable value to newcomers or readers who have a harder time understanding more abstract theological concepts, like myself, which is why Mere Christianity is so appealing. When explaining many of the same concepts that Packer explained in his book, Lewis chose to forego technical language in favor of more everyday language. Like I said, his tone is very conversational, so not only does it make everything he writes more digestible, but it also just respects the reader's dignity. Lewis says, no need to feel like a dummy here. From theoretical concepts like the law of objective morality in our world, to contemporary issues like sexual behaviors, to comprehensive breakdowns of the character of God himself, Lewis just writes in a way that the common man can understand. A lot of the accessibility of the information in the book is also due to reason number 3 for why you should read Mere Christianity, which is because Lewis uses a lot of analogies. In a sense, Mere Christianity is a picture book, because with nearly every point Lewis makes, there's an illustration to go along with it. Not a literal illustration, but a metaphorical one, and when it comes to writing metaphors, Lewis is king. Having difficulties understanding how there's a universal consensus on the difference between right and wrong? There's an analogy for that. Trying to grasp how Jesus being the Son of God is different from you and me being children of God? There's an analogy for that. Discerning what faith is and the role it plays in being a Christian? There's an analogy for that. I think my favorite illustration or analogy Lewis uses is when he's describing the 3 relations of morality. That is, morality between man and man, morality inside each man, and morality between man and the power that made him. He illustrates this by describing a fleet of ships sailing in formation. In order to have a successful voyage, the ships have to 1. Stay in formation and not collide with one another, i.e. morality between man and man. 2. Each be individually seaworthy and have good running engines, i.e. morality inside each man. And 3. Be sailing in the right direction towards the correct destination, i.e. morality between man and the power that made him. If any one of those 3 aspects of the fleet falls through, then the other 2 aspects will be negatively effective, and soon the whole voyage will be a bust. Similar to how if a man compromises his morality in one of these aspects, the other 2 aspects will also be affected, and ultimately he'll never achieve his full potential. To provide such concrete imagery for such abstract topics is invaluable in my opinion. Like I said, with Lewis, there are no dummies. There are only people who haven't yet had a subject explained to them in a way that they can actually visualize. I keep so many of these metaphors in my back pocket now for when I get the opportunity to illustrate one of these tough concepts, so for both your own head knowledge and your ability to discuss said topics with others, I suggest reading up. Reason number 4 for why you should read Mere Christianity is because it wasn't written in a vacuum. Remember that Lewis originally wrote the words that eventually became Mere Christianity as a form of ministry to the British soldiers and people of England during World War II. That's to say that he didn't just sit down at his typewriter one day and begin smashing out Christian platitudes because he had nothing better to do. Rather, he was a man on a mission, speaking to people who desperately needed to hear comforting but also convicting words. So that sense of urgency and purpose is well conveyed in the book. Lewis doesn't waste time dwelling on hypotheticals, ranting about ideals, or otherwise discussing Christianity as it would exist in a vacuum, but instead uses his limited page space to only cover the aspects that really truly matter. Faith as it actually exists in our world today, the material that's actually gonna be on the test. Every point made then comes across as both purposeful and personable. Going back to the only other theology book I've ever read, and thus the only book I can compare Mere Christianity to, Knowing God, which I promise is a good book, it doesn't read with the same level of personability that Mere Christianity does. When I read Knowing God, most of the information I got out of it just sort of stayed inside my head. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. From my perspective, Packer never connected the dots between academic head knowledge and my actual uncensored everyday walk with Christ. With Lewis and Mere Christianity, though, I didn't have that same problem. Despite being a book that also covers a lot of academic head knowledge, each chapter still circles back to answer the overarching question of, so what? So what if there's an objective law of morality in our world? So what if I'm prideful? So what if Jesus died on the cross for my sins? These are questions that can be answered, again, in a vacuum, or rather with an asterisk next to them that says, in theory, or otherwise answered in a long-winded way that loses readers halfway through, a manner in which a lot of theologians write. Again, there's definitely a time and place for those types of writings, but Lewis is not content to write like that. Instead, he answers questions in a way that relates back to our everyday lives. Take the question of pride again, for example. So what if I'm prideful? Well, Lewis explains that pride, by its nature, elevates us to a place where we unhealthily and unrelentingly compete against and compare ourselves to others. This rat race inevitably turns everyone into our enemy and makes it impossible for us to be content with what we have. Therefore, if we don't want everyone to eventually become our enemy, and we don't want our sanity to slowly unravel in pursuit of being number one, we should do our best to not be prideful. So not only does Lewis boil down tough concepts into plain English and accompany them with helpful illustrations, but he also does so in a way that reminds readers why those concepts matter in the first place. It's very easy to miss the forest for the trees in Christianity, so Lewis's intentionality in sticking to only the most important what's, whys, and hows of the faith makes the book an excellent field guide, both for those who are learning about Christianity for the first time and those who have been navigating it for years. Reason 4.5 for why you should read Mere Christianity is my honorable mention that I don't consider a super sturdy reason on its own to read the book, but I still wanted to include it, and that's that you should read Mere Christianity because it's got a line you can quote on just about every page. Now, C.S. Lewis wasn't a professional quote maker by any means, but he does have a curious way of finding his words plastered on just about every middle-aged Christian woman's Facebook wall or actual wall. Mere Christianity, then, is a goldmine of wisdom-laden, coffee mug-worthy Lewis quotes like, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." And, "God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself because it is not there. There is no such thing." Going back to the question of pride, one of my favorite lines from the book is, "As long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you." Another one of my favorites is, "God knows our situation. He will not judge us as if we had no difficulties to overcome. What matters is the sincerity and perseverance of our will to overcome them." Lewis just has a way of punching you in the face with words that would fit on a Hallmark card. So if none of my reasons have been convincing for you thus far, you should at least read Mere Christianity for the Instagram captions. The fifth and final reason you should read Mere Christianity is because other people are reading it. In the world of Christian literature, you won't find a more commonly read book than Mere Christianity, besides the Bible, of course. Even nearly 70 years after it was published, millions of people are still reading it. Why? I think the answer is twofold. One, people are still reading it because, as I've drilled home in this video, it's accessible. Lewis drops the fancy language and ivory tower exclusivity of theology and replaces them with words that everyone can understand in a tone that makes every reader feel welcome. The only barrier of entry for the book is an openness to hear what Lewis has to say. That makes it very easy to pick up off the shelf and read for just about anyone. Two, people are still reading Mere Christianity because the information it contains is timeless. Even though the book was written for a very specific audience during a very specific period in history, its message is universally applicable. The mereness of Christianity that gives the book its title refers to Lewis's intention to address only the aspects of the faith that all Christians agree upon, rather than discuss the individualities of different denominations. This means the book is full of non-negotiables about Christianity that remain true and relevant across borders and generations. Being such a concise one-stop shop for biblical truth, then, it's no wonder people are still reading it. So even if it's just to see what all the fuss is about, you should read this book. In all seriousness though, people wouldn't still be reading Mere Christianity unless it really had something to say. People who are wiser than me have read it and recommend it, and the Bible says it's wise to listen to wise counsel, so there you go. So whether you're looking into Christianity for the first time, you're re-examining it after growing up in the church, or you're even trying to build an argument against it, you should familiarize yourself with one of the books that so many Christians have read and highly regard. And there you have it, folks. 5.5 reasons why you should read Mere Christianity. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you say, "C.S. Lewis, you a dog." Also, it's only like 220 pages, which is honestly pretty short compared to a lot of the books out there, so don't let its length be an excuse not to read it. I love this book, and I really do believe in what it says, so if it wasn't on your radar already, I sincerely hope after watching this video that you'll consider reading it in the future. If my standing wasn't enough for you here, you can click the link in the description that'll take you to my blog that I recently started, where I wrote another short review / summary / personal reflection on the book. If you couldn't tell between this video and the last one I put out, I love reading and I love talking about books, so don't be surprised if I put out more videos like this. Let me know in the comments if you've read Mere Christianity, and if you have, what you thought about it. And if you haven't read it, let me know if my silver tongue persuaded you in any way to give it a shot. Thank you so much for watching. Seriously, if you're still watching at this point, please know how much I appreciate you. I'm slowly but surely growing on this platform, and that's entirely thanks to people like you who stick around and just want to be a part of what I'm doing on this channel. So, thank you. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, as I have more videos just like this one on the way. I appreciate you all very much, and I will see you in the next one.